Hello to the curious and welcome to the next part of the series. Now we're going to be looking at user progress here, and this is going to be a really important one. This ties a lot of what we've learned together and some. So currently what we want to do is basically create a new service that saves all our user progress together from the user, which comes from Strapi. And then what we want to do is have that data saved locally in the cookies and then send any data to do with progress tied to that to Firebase. And it's going to be saved there in collections and documents, which we're then going to pull back from Firebase and use in our UI. So if you're viewing this, there is probably at least something in here that you're going to take away and learn from. And this is how data layers work in front end. So let's go take a look and see how we can build it. But make sure to follow me on Twitter on the Hashton. And if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell notification to know when the next video in the series is coming. But without further ado, let's go take a look. So in front of you is the next step for Curious Courses. This is user progress. The idea that we can set user progress, record it to a database somewhere else, and then also pull it back into the code and visualize it in the UI. So for example here, in the course cards, so for advanced JavaScript, you can see that we've watched the video already, but there is a slight tracking system here for progress. So if I click a video, and let's go to variables, and then let's go to conditionals, and we'll go to functions. And then if we go back to Curious Courses, we can see that that has now advanced. And if we go all the way to the very end, so go to scope, arrays, and finally loops, that's all the videos watched. And then if I go back, you can see that that is now completed. So that is the user progress system we're going to build in this tutorial now. So stay tuned and let's go build it. So this is what it currently looks like without those changes on. You can see that these are just normal cards, but obviously we want to make sure that these have the user progress on them. So let's jump into the code and start building the foundation for adding user progress to our learning platform. So let's open up VS Code, and the first thing we want to do is just tidy up our Tsconfig a bit. So in here we're saying our compiler target is ES5. But in actuality, we want it to be ES 2015. So make sure you go and change that before we get going. Also, we need to make sure to add Sharp to help us with all the Firebase stuff we're about to do. So let's go ahead, open up the terminal, and you can see that we're running our project right now on a split screen. But in the other one, we're going to type npm install sharp at 0.335. All right, and press enter. Excellent. Right, so that's installed. And now comes the fun part. We're going to figure out how to actually add user progress to our learning platform. So let's jump back into our browser and we'll go to the Curious Courses database. So I'll go all the way to the start and I'll show you how this works. So if we go to Firestore database, and where it says collection here, you want to create a user progress collection. So if you click start a collection, just call it user progress like this. Simple as. Now I don't need to create one because I've already made one. And in fact, I'm just going to delete this to help us show progress when we do start getting this working. All right, so let's open the terminal again. And we're actually going to install Firebase. So I'm just going to clear this so it's easier to see. And then we're going to put in this command here. So npm install Firebase, and then we're going to add Firestore as well. So Firebase /Firestore. Then press enter. Excellent, and that's all installed. So we're just going to go to the root of our folder and create a new file, and we'll call it Firebase init.js. So this is where our Firebase information is going to go. So we need to import some modules from Firebase, and then our config section for Firebase as well. So in here, we're going to have an API key, an auth domain, a project ID, a storage bucket, a messenger, sender ID, app ID, and measurement ID. And if you're wondering where to get all this from, we're going to show you in just a moment. Now I'll just add the final bits at the bottom. So first things first, we need to initialize the app and pass in the Firebase config, which is this big object here with all the keys. And then we'll create a new const or variable of get Firestore, and it's going to pass in the config essentially after it's been initialized. And then we're just going to export the database. So that is our database ready to use in our project. but we need to go show you where you get all of these from. So let's go back to Firebase in our web browser. So obviously sign up to Firebase, create your project. So if I go back here, and you can see that I've got a project, Curious Byte. So I'll create a new one. So I'll call it test project. Press continue. I don't need to enable Gemini. I don't need to enable Google Analytics. And then it's just going to create your project for you. We'll just let this go ahead and we're done. So your Firebase project is ready. We'll click continue. And one of the first things you'll be able to see is this code icon here, which says web. Now, if you click that, we'll give it a name. We'll call it test database, and we'll click register app and let it load. And there we go. Those are all our details for the app ready to use. So you can just basically copy and paste this and put it into your Firebase init if you want, but that isn't the safest way to do it. The safest way to do this is doing what I'm about to show you now. So make sure to copy this information and we'll head back to VS Code. So let's go to our .env file. Now in here, we've currently got all our other keys and bits and bobs of information. So if I go down here and I want to add those Firebase details that I spoke about earlier, we simply just put them in like this. So make sure that you've got these keys in this naming terminology. So obviously whatever's relevant, I gave it a prefix of Firebase so I know what I was doing, and then obviously what it was for. Now the very important part is before each and every single one, you need to put next_public_. And this means Next.js is just able to access these and provide them for you in your app. So very important, you make sure that you name it in this convention. So all of this, then everything after is custom for you. Now you can put your details in here. So all these details here, just translate it and bring it over. So I'll take one over for now. So go over here, make a string and paste it in. And just like that, and do the same for the rest like this, and keep going down until you've got all the information correct as you want it. Now, one good thing you could do is you could create a new file called env.dist. And what this is essentially, it's like a distribution file that you do actually want to be passed into your GitHub or wherever you want to save this eventually. So no one can go to your code base on Git or wherever and see what you've posted. Like the sensitive data is basically protected. So we'll paste in this example information here. So if anybody wants to use it in the future, you can do. And then all you do when you start a new project, you just rename this and you can basically start using this as a .env file. So I'll put this back and I'll make sure that in git ignore that these files are definitely ignored, but the env.dist is not ignored, which is very important. And you could also copy all this and put it into here, into your env.dist, and then you could just change these to example as well. So now you've got essentially your env file, but without the sensitive information in there. And what I would do is I would keep that information safely somewhere else and pass that to people you trust as is when you need. If, for example, you have another engineer work on your project, you can pass the information to them when they need it. This is not something that should be public domain. It should not be on your Git. It's a massive security risk. Someone can go in, grab this information and run up your bills or hack you, or do even worse, you take sensitive information from your users and cause all kinds of havoc like fraud or whatever else. So very, very careful with what you expose in terms of server or hosting information or database information. And this is one way to avoid it. So now another place we want to go is users.ts. Let me close these other files. Now this response is currently set to a URL which isn't relevant to us anymore. We need to just quickly change this. So this fetch URL now needs to be localhost API users and me. And this is where we're going to have our API for our users. Now we're going to actually create a service that is separate to Strapi within Next.js. So we're going to go to app, and within app, we're going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it service/user progress. And then within there, we're going to create a new file called update user progress.ts. Excellent. And we need to import everything that we're going to need. So we're going to need all of these Firebase methods. We're also going to need our database from Firebase init, which we just created, and make sure that that is updated. So if I go to Firebase init now, this should be connected to your env file, which you just created. And now we've got access to it all over the project. And then we also want to bring in course details and lesson details as well. So currently we do not have user progress type. So if I click that, we'll need to go create that in a moment. create a new file. So we'll call it user progress.types.ts. And then within here, we're going to create two types. So this is our lesson details. So whether it's completed, it's going to be a Boolean, and the date in which it's completed. And we're basically going to get that from a timestamp from Firebase. And then we're going to get the ID, which is going to be a string, the lesson ID, which is going to be a number, but it's also going to be nullable. So potentially it could return nothing. Lesson name and string, and lesson description, obviously a string. So that is your lesson details. Now we've got our course details as well, which we need typing. And this is information we're going to send to and from Firebase and have saved there. So this is very important. And then in course details, course ID, course completed, course name, course progress, course description, thumbnail, URL, lesson total, lessons, which is basically lesson details as an array type. Okay, so those are the two types we need adding. So if I go back to here, this should be now available, and that should be working again. Just lower the size. Let me just lower the size of this terminal by taking it out. So this is the rest of the code. We're basically creating an async function called update course and lesson progress. And we're going to take in some parameters of user ID, course details, and lesson details, which we just created in this user progress types folder. So that is just some of the boilerplate. And then what we're returning is a promise. And basically this is coming from Firebase. So obviously the database, the user progress collection, the user ID and the courses, and then the course ID itself. And again, doc is a part of Firebase's methodology. So if you ever use Firebase, you need to get used to using doc as a method. And that essentially just gets you the document reference from Firebase. So Firebase works in documents and collections. And essentially those mean the document is the actual bit of data and the collection is the data that docs are held within. So for example, we've got a user progress collection. Okay, so we've got the course doc reference there, then we've got our lessons. So these are two separate ones. So this is a course and the lesson documents. So this is just information for those individual documents. And within that, we've got the lesson ID and then the lessons as well in here. And then if we want to mark them as complete, we want to write to the database. So if I open this, I'll show you what I mean. So in here, we have the lesson doc reference, and then we're just going to spread the lesson details once we get it back into here. And we're going to mark it as completed as true. So this basically just makes sure that we get all the up-to-date lesson details. And then we want to mark it as completed true once we've completed all the lessons. And then we just say date completed with a server timestamp. So on the database, we're going to know when we actually completed the course or when the user completed the course, which is very important. And then we're just going to merge that in. So that is the full command for marking a lesson as complete, and then doing that with a separate document write. Now, this is where we're going to check to see if all the lessons are completed and check their completion status. So we're going to query the collection of lessons. We're going to create a variable lessons query for that. Then we're going to grab a snapshot of the database and bring it back to us. So we're going to use getDocs to do that from Firebase. And we're going to pass in the lesson query, which is the variable above. And now we want to get a filtered down version of the completed lessons count. So we're going to go grab the snapshot that we just got, and we're going to filter it to see the completed data. So we just want that little bit of information, and then we're just going to see the length of it. So we're just going to count the amount of completed lessons within that course. And then we're just going to total it up. So we're going to add the total together, and then we're going to check all of the lessons that are completed. So it checks it against the lesson total, and it checks the completed lesson count. So once it gets to that point, like we saw earlier in the demo, it's going to go to a green bar. So it's very important to know that, and it's going to set that in the database for us. And then it's going to update the course document with these new details, including the computed course progress, which is very important and very handy for us to calculate. And we're doing that calculation here. So we're updating the document with the course name, the thumbnail, the course description, and importantly, the course progress. So this is where we do our course progress calculation. So we get the completed lessons count and divide it against the total lessons. And then we do a percentage, and then we do a fixed integer, essentially. So we basically have the floating point to a point that we agree. So it's going to be, essentially, if we were 100%, it would be 100.00, just so if we want to work with percentages before 100, so like 33 point whatever percent, 33.33%, for example, if there's 3 lessons, it can handle that. And then we simply just merge that in as true. So that is the update user progress async function that we're creating to essentially update the user progress as they're going through the lessons. So very, very important. And again, all of this is going to be available on GitHub. So if you want to go look at it a bit more deeply, you can do. Don't worry about missing any details here. You can go check it out and compare your code to this. Now let's move on to working on the UI to actually add some of this new database work we've done. So let's go to courselist.tsx, close these others down. And one of the first things we want to do is we want to make this a client component. So we'll go at the very top and type in use client as we're using Next.js. Now, one of the first things we need to do is get the user ID to basically access the database and set it to their user ID. We're getting this data from Strapi auth, and then we're saving it in our cookies. So we're going to need to go to the cookies to go grab that information to use for Firebase. I know it's a little complicated, but this is what happens when you have to use external services. So we're going to go up here. So we'll add this new user data variable here. And we're going to basically give it the type of user data, and we're going to go to our cookies using JS cookie to go get this information. Now, because we're using a client component, we're going to need to use JS cookie to do that. And we need to go add user data as a type here, but if we go to login page now, we can see that user data is currently not being exported. So let's do that now. So let's export user data, which is an interface. So we could extend it if we wanted. And now that all should be working. So user data is happy to be imported by Next.js. So that should be working. So now we should have that user data. Now what we want to do is just to test it, we'll add a use effect. And then within here, we're just going to do a console.log user data. I just want to go see what is actually being returned right now. So if I go to inspect element here, go to console, and I refresh, or if I click advanced JavaScript, and let's just make sure we go to the terminal. We'll just restart this. We're going to need to delete this part from the tutorial where this was here. Okay, everything seems to be working again. Right, so let's go see what user data returns. So let's go see what user data returns. So if we go to courses, so currently what we're getting back is our auth token, our email address, and a username. So we're getting the user data back, but importantly, we're getting the ID back, which is very important. So that is all working well. So currently the course list props is pretty bare bones. We're going to need to go get the course name to make this work. So we're going to add it as a type of string, but it's very important to us. And then just down here where we're destructuring our props, we also want to add course name as well. Let's close those down. We can see we've got an error now because we've requested to add the course name, but we've not added it. So let's go do that now. So course name equals, and we'll do course, and we'll pass in title. And we're getting that from up here, which is where we're fetching the course data from Strapi. So you can see now we're starting to mix services we've created with information from Strapi and saving it locally. And eventually this is how you start to build up a front-end ecosystem, because data doesn't always just come from one place. You have to think about all the separate places that it could come from and how they work together. So there's a lot of data engineering involved on the front end, and people don't always quite realize that. And this is more when you go into the deeper side of things beyond UI. So let's head over to course list again. So just down here, we're going to add it, and we can get rid of this one now. It's console log. Now you can see here we need to import our update course and lesson progress. So let's do that now. So we'll go to quick here and we'll add the import. So it says ID does not exist on user data. So let's go take a look. So go to user data here. So let's go add that now. So we'll go ID and we'll go string. And that should have solved that issue. Now the only thing we need to do is sort out course details. We're going to grab that from above by adding this here. So we've got use fetch course data, and we're going to get course details from this custom hook here. And basically we're going to pass in the course ID and the string. So now that all should be sorted, and it's working pretty well. So this is the new use effect we've added. And essentially this is just going to update the progress when we select the lessons. But to do that, we just need to update this click handler here. We need to make sure we just make it an async function so that it goes off and does its thing and we're not essentially blocked by it. So next thing we want to do is test to see if it's actually working in Firebase. So if we go to Firebase, so you can see here there's currently nothing here, but if I go to our project and I'll click, let's say, any project, so I'll click this one, let's clear this, and click this one here. So it says function is not implemented. So this is in 134, so I'll click that. So this has been created by VS Code itself. So let's go see where this is coming from. So use fetch course data. So we jumped the gun a little too quick. This is actually what we need to do next. So this is actually where we're doing the fetching of the course data to make this all work. So let's go to this file here. So use fetch course data, and let's just update it. So you can see here, we've made it a client component because we want it to work on the client. And then basically we're fetching it with the course ID using state. And then essentially, and very importantly with Firebase, what we say is we want all the data. So normally Firebase works where it just sends you one bit of information at a time. And what we're saying is we want everything from the collection, and we're using this populate equals asterisk to get that done. So we're getting all the course information by ID, and we're getting all of that information. Now this is specific to Firebase. So for example, if you use something like Supabase, it would be a slightly different setup. And then we want to do that for all the courses as well. And that's if the ID doesn't match. And then the other change is down here where we're actually setting the courses we're setting the course, and we're basically just creating an array to wrap it in. So that's what this is doing here. And if it's not, it's just not going to wrap it in an array if there's multiple courses in there. And then finally, we're just going to return course ID and basically rerun it if the course ID changes. And then we just export it. And then if we go back to course list here, and if I hover over this, so one of the issues it wasn't importing, and one of the main reasons anything doesn't work as a developer is a typo. So it's courses data, and that should be able to be implemented now. So we'll import that now, and that is all working. So let's go try that out. So now if we go here, it looks a lot better. And if I click Introduction to JavaScript, that is working. Variables, conditionals, and that should be enough. So let's go to the database in Firebase and see what it looks like. So this is our database. I'm going to refresh it, and there we go. We can now see that we have a user progress collection that we've created that it automatically creates. And then it's got the course collection, and then it's got the document based on which course it is. And it's got the lessons here. So I can go and see all this information for each lesson, which is incredible. And each one is different. And you can add or change information based on what you need for your learning platform. And then if we go back here, you can see if you click a course, it gives you all the course information as well. So very, very handy. And even gives you the course progress, which we're going to use later in the UI to basically show progress bars. But yeah, that's really getting set up on Firebase. So let's go back to our project, go to courses, and then if I go to CSS beginner and click that one, and then I go back to the database and then I refresh it and I click courses, you can now see that course 2 and 3 are present. So you can have multiple courses showing progress, and this is the CSS one. And then you go to lessons and you can see that I have viewed one of the lessons, and that's the lesson ID for that. What is CSS? So very, very good. And then you can see that I've done 50% progress on here because there's only 2 videos. So that makes sense. So it's all working as intended for multiple courses, which is fantastic. All right, so let's go back to the courses page, and we're going to make some more changes. Use user data.ts, and let's close these other files. Now in here, we've got to add a lot more information. So this is the user data type. From here, we're going to add ID number. Just going to move this auth token below here, and then we're going to make an email of string created at. Going to do that as a string as well. Then our auth token, and then we're going to check if they're logged in, and then we have is logged in below, and then we're just going to have their watched lessons, and this is going to be an array of numbers, so that is fine. And there we go. That's the user data type updated. And then what we can do is we can get rid of the null ability here and empty the default state. That's all fine. That's all fine. Okay, and that's really all the changes we wanted to make. We just wanted to change the data type here. So let's go down to stored theme and just fix this a little bit. So it's what we want the theme to actually come from is the window. And in Next.js, we need to do it in this way and do the check on window to see if it's available before we can go get any local storage. So this works a lot better now. So that is in layout. Okay, we just need to make this change in header.tsx. So we remove the null here. It just is like that. And then if we go to layout.tsx, so inside header.tsx, we just need to make a little change because we're getting a type error here, which is user data undefined is not assignable to type user data null. That's a very easy fix. All we do is we just go undefined here, or you could simply make this an optional prop. Either way sorts it. So if we do this, that should work as well. And if we do that, that should work as well. I personally prefer this method here, just because we want to make it clear that that is the case. Now, generally, you have your optional props at the bottom grouped together, and because you don't want a mix of optional props and required props all mixed and matched inside your interfaces. That's just a best practice. Now, we're setting our data in the Firebase database. We're setting our progress there, but we want to actually get that progress back and use it in our UI. So in these cards here, I'm going to show you exactly how we're going to do that. So let's go back into VS Code, close all these down, and we want to go to app service user progress, and we want to create a new file. So we're going to call it fetch user progress.ts. And in here, we're going to import a bunch of stuff from Firebase. We're going to get our Firebase database, and we're also going to get in our course details and lesson details as types. So not a huge amount, but it gives the basis for us to make this fetch. Then we want to create a interface of user data. And essentially what this is just taking in the course ID in an array. And basically we're going to pass in course details as the index signature, which basically, if you know what arrays are, every index in an array is essentially unique because it's numbered. And that's what this is getting. And then we just want to create a function. So export a sync function, and we'll call it fetch user progress, pass in user ID as a string, and then the return type is going to be a promise, and we'll be passing in a user data. Then here we're going to make a try catch with the following information. So we want the user progress ref from the Firebase database, hence us using doc, and we're going to basically just go and grab user progress in general, the whole collection. And then what we want to do is get the specific courses collection and then get the ref for that, and then save that as user data as an empty object for now. So that's the basis. And then we just add the rest of it. So we've got a for loop here, and essentially we're creating a for loop here, which is creating a variable course doc, and it's just going over the snapshot documents, which again is the individual bits of data from your Firebase database. And then from there, we're essentially going to create a variable called course data. This is going to be the important stuff here, and we're going to pass it as a type as course details. So we're going to typecast it here using this as keyword. Then we've got the lessons collection ref here. So basically grabbing lessons, and then we're basically saving that information and we're returning it in this ref here. And then basically we're grabbing all the lesson data here, and this is what we want returning. The ID, whether it's completed or not, the lesson name, and the lesson description. And then it's got some fallbacks in case we don't have any of that. So no name provided, no description available, which is always handy to have. It makes it very clear why no data has come back, because you've added these fallbacks. So if anything you take away from this lesson is to make sure that your data layer is as safe as possible from bad data, because being defensive with bad data is a huge part of being a front-end engineer. And then finally, we've got our user data. We're passing it course ID, and then we're just spreading our course data in here, and then the lessons is going to be our lesson data. So that's what we're returning when we get user data. Then we just return it, and then we've just got some error handling here. We've got a catch for error because we're doing a try catch. So that is our fetch user progress all sorted. So let's test this on the profile page. So just here under profile, I'm going to create some new state. So set user progress, and this is where we're going to store it. And then we're just going to create a new use effect here. Then underneath, we need to add our user data, and just make sure we import the user data type, and we're bringing that in from the login page. And then we're also bringing in some more state for is user data loading and set is user data loading. Would actually prefer this goes underneath the state, so it's a little separate. So it's a bit more bunched together. And then I just want to add a use effect, which essentially ties that all together. We need to get fetch user progress into the document. So we've got that, and there we go. Now let's have a look at what this is actually doing. So use effect, and it's doing an if check if the user is loading. So if it's not loading and the user ID does exist, it's going to basically fetch this user progress using the ID, and then it's going to get the progress essentially, and then it's got some error handling here. And there's some parameters into the use effect. We're passing in the user ID and the state of whether it's loading or not. Now, you don't have to put this in here, but I generally prefer having that in there. Because it's state, it's automatically going to update without it needing to be a dependency, but I prefer it to update right away when this happens. Okay, let's move on. And then just above here, we're going to create a new component, but it's going to be a subcomponent within here. Now, essentially what this is doing is this is creating a circle from Material UI's component. So we just need to import all these props from there. So import from MUI, import from MUI, and import the box component as well. All right, so there we go. So what we're going to do is add in this new bit of information. So we're going to do a check to see on the username whether the user has, just going to do a check to see if the username exists. If it does, it's probably logged in. Now we're just going to create a paper component, which essentially has all this information in. So I'm just going to import that now from Material UI, and then just add some basic padding here. And then within that, we're going to add some typography. Welcome to the profile page, which we already had. And then I'm going to create a list item with all the user details in there. So let's add all this in now. So email does not exist on user data. Going to double check, and that is correct. So let's go here and add email string, and that should fix that. And then created at, let's add that as well. Right, to created at string, and that should be fixed. Let's make sure we're importing the image. So let's import image from next. We'll do /image. Oh, it doesn't like being destructured. Okay, so there we go. So let's go down here. That image is all now sorted. Let's get the check icon from MUI. Let's go all the way up here, import that. So that's coming from icons material check. So I think we should be happy with all that. Let's just go through this quickly. So this is our use effect up here, but the markup down here has changed. So we're basically creating a list item, which includes username, email, account created, and we're getting the information from user data. And then we're passing in which courses are completed. And in here, we're going to just check to see if there is any user progress. And if that is the case, we're then going to map over all this and present the information on each course. And if it's completed, then it has that information. If not, it doesn't. And then it's got a loading state as well. So if it's loading, it will just show loading first before you get the information. And then, yeah, all the other stuff that we used to have on the profile as well, including the auth check. All right. Okay, and let's go take a look. So if we go to the profile page here, and as it's loading, we'll wait. I'll just refresh it. We can at least see that we've got some more information here. So the username, email, when the account was created, and whether the courses are completed or not. So basically here, in login /page.tsx, we just need to update this user data here on line 43. So essentially it adds ID, email, and auth token, and it's getting all the data from our fetch command here from Strapi. So now if we refresh this and we sign out, yes, I am sure, sign in and go to profile. So one thing we need to do is just up here is just update this use effect here. So one thing we need to do is actually just update this use effect here, which is reading the user data from the cookie which we're getting from Strapi. So I'll just go and swap this out quickly. And we're just checking to see if the cookie exists first, and then we're passing that information, and we're setting that information is user data loading. So we're tying all this together now, Firebase and Strapi and local storage and cookies and all this stuff. So now, if we go to the courses, we see our progress by percentage, by a progress bar, and it tells us whether something is completed or not. So if I go to the CSS beginner course, let's go here, and I click the second video, click that, and then I go to profile, you can now see that that has a green tick, and this is 100% complete. Now that is a great start. We're starting to use the user progress from Firebase that we created, and we're pulling back and we're using the UI. But if you remember at the start of the video, we had it so that we had the progress bars in the course itself, which I think looks really cool, especially when you're returning to a course. You want to know where you left off, whether you've completed the course or not, so you don't go back to the same course again, or if you just want to revisit it and top up your knowledge. So let's go and add this to the UI. Okay, so let's close all these down and let's start working on the courses page now, where those courses all live. So we'll go to courses/page.tsx, and we're just going to update. So what we're going to do is add our fetch courses data into the courses page, and then essentially replace this with courses details, and we can get rid of this one up here. And then all we do is down below, we put in course details, and that's our courses page updated for now. So just here in the course data type in course.types.ts, which is inside the courses folder, we're going to update this and just add course progress. And we're going to make it a string and not an optional. This is something that we need. And there we go. That's everything that we need. So that is up to date. And within course ID, we're going to go to page.tsx here. And we're just going to do some simple changes. So the first thing we're going to do is import use fetch course data here from our custom hook. And then here we're going to basically create a new variable called course. And we're basically going to fetch course data here based on the course ID. And then we've got some extra state here we're adding. So we're going to set the selected lesson and then save that into state. And then we're just going to add the course name to this course list here. And that's about it. That's the only updates we need to make to course ID page. So this is the individual course page. And very importantly, we're going to update course card. And then if we go and open course card, you can see it's the first one on the list. Let's go and edit this. So all we're doing is we're importing linear progress, the chart from MUI. So that's coming from MUI material linear progress. And then we're creating two new props, course progress and course completed. One's going to be a string and the other a boolean, but they're both going to be optionals. And then we're updating, obviously, the props we're destructuring to include that. And we're just going to add some default fallback behavior here. So 0 here and false here. And then we're going to add linear progress at the bottom here. And we're going to have the variant of determinate. And we're going to have a course completed determine whether this is going to be a green or a primary colored chart, essentially, where the line goes across. And then we're just going to pass the course progress as the value here. And then we're going to then have some styling here. So we're going to have some height of 20 pixels, margin top. And I've added a little border radius on the bar. Now you can change this however you want and make it custom for you, but these are just my preferences on the course progress bar. Now, if I refresh this, you can see that there is a user progress bar, but the information isn't actually on there just yet. But that's okay. We've created the UI. We just need to make sure the information being passed in is correct. So let's go do that now. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a new service in here. I'm going to call it fetch all lessons.ts. We're going to create a new file in here and we're going to call it fetch all lessons.ts. And then we're going to import obviously our Firebase methods and keywords. And we're going to import our Firebase methods because this is mostly going to be around fetching data from Firebase. And then we need to add our lesson interface for this project. So we need to add our lesson type for this hook. And then we're going to create an async function called fetch all lessons, which is going to return a promise of lessons, an array of lessons. Essentially just getting a snapshot of the data from lessons. So it's going to get the collection of lessons and then it's going to put it into an array. And this is the default. If there's nothing there right now, that's the starting point, just an empty array. And then it's just going to do a for loop through the snapshot because it's an object. And it's going to go get the ID and all the other lesson information by ID. And then it's going to push it to the array once it's got that information. And then there's some just error checking here, checking to see if it's empty. And then it says no lessons found. Otherwise, it returns lessons array. And then there's just some error handling here as well. There we go. Yeah, that's fetch all lessons. And then let's go to course grid and we'll update this. So first things first, we're going to need to add some more state and I'll add it under here. And just make sure to import this from React. And as a result of using this, we're going to have to make this a client component. So this is now a client component. This is course grid. Let's close these other tabs down. Nice and neat. And then just under here, we're going to add a use effect to essentially get the progress. So I'm just going to get this from React, import this from our services, and then just make sure that we're passing the user ID as a prop in here. We're going to make it a string, and then just make sure we're destructuring this. Okay, and that sorts all these errors out. And yeah, we're fetching the progress, which is a new variable we've created to basically do an async call to check if the user ID is available. And then we fetch the user progress based on the ID, and then we set it in state. So we'll set it as data or progress data. So now progress data is here, we should actually use it. So what we need to do is update this little return here. And basically what we're doing is we're wrapping all our UI in course data. One thing we need to do is just make sure we wrap this in a React fragment first. Okay. Just because this section was broken up into two pieces, so React wasn't happy about that. So courses data we're mapping over, and we're getting the course data, and then you can set the type here if you want. I've just set it to any for now, but essentially course data, we're basically getting the course ID as a string here. We're getting the course progress, and that's basically coming from Firebase, and then whether it's completed or not, again, coming from Firebase with some fallbacks. And then we're getting the thumbnail URL. And then we're updating the course card to pass in the course progress, course completed, and the thumbnail URL here. And that is sorted. Okay, so let's go to the courses page now, which is courses / page. And now that we've made some changes to courses grid, we just need to have that reflected in here. So here we're just going to add some state. So user ID, set user ID. Make sure we import that in from React. And then we just need to add a use effect below here. So go to import use effect from React, and it's showing us an error for cookies. So we need to make sure we get cookies from JS cookie. Then it should be fine. So basically we're just grabbing user data and doing a check to see if it exists. And if it does, we're essentially going to pass the data and then just set it in a state. We're just going to grab the ID. That's all we're interested in, just the user ID. So we're going to set that into user ID here. And then if we go all the way down here, just going to do a quick check on the user ID, and we're going to say loading user data if they don't have a user ID. And then very simply, all of that was done to just pass the user ID into the course grid. And that should all be happy now. So let's just add a little space here and just go to layout, layout.tsx, and just update this. So essentially we're doing a little check here on the window just to make sure it exists, similar to what we did before, and then just doing that in a use effect, which is what you need to do in Next.js to make the window object work. Then we go to page, in the main app. And again, here we need to update course grid as well. So similar to what we did before, we're getting the courses information and the user ID, exact same use effect, doing the little check here, and then we're just passing user ID here, and then that should pass. So we don't need that comment anymore. And there we go. So that has all been added now. Let's go take a look. And immediately you can see the difference. If I refresh it, you can even see the animation, which is quite fun. So now we're correctly showing the user progress, and it's visible in the courses page, it's visible in the home page, and it's even visible in the profile. And this is from creating your own service using an external API or endpoint that you've created. I've used Firebase. You can go and use Superbase or anything else out there and create something like this for yourself on top of Strapi. So Strapi has its own services, but you can add even more to it. And there we go. You've now built the user progress system into your learning platform. A very important set of lessons in there to build something out using an external service. So you can try to rely on Strapi as much as possible, but for anything that you want to layer in that's custom, just create your own service for it. So Firebase is a great way to do that. Superbase is another great way to do that. And then to create that, set that, pull it back, and then use it in your UI is incredible. What a skill. So that is our user progress lesson. I hope you found that useful. If you did, make sure to follow me on the hashtag on Twitter or X. And also make sure to subscribe, like, and hit the bell notification to know when the next videos are arriving. But other than that, I'll catch you guys in the next one.